In the last video, we set up the user interface of our application such that the main component's render method returned two subcomponents, the title and a photo wall, whereas the photo wall's render method returned three components, based on the array of posts that were passed into it as props. In this video, we'll look at functional components. So far, we've been using classes to set up our components. Every class we've declared so far, all it has is a render method. Let's just for a minute try and think of the React components as functions, and the render method as if it was a return statement to a function. In that case, imagine this as a function. This function would return one title, one photo wall. The photo wall as its own function would return three photos, and each photo would then return a figure, each figure containing an image, button, and caption. So every one of our classes only uses the render method. We'll use more methods later on, for sure, but for now, we can actually recreate our components with regular functions, instead of the class syntax. This is known as stateless functional components, and we'll implement it now. Let's start with the photo wall class. Declare it as a function instead. Function, photo wall, with arguments and scope. And instead of having a render method, we can just return all of the required JSX right here. And before we were accessing the props based on the component instance through this. Well, now the export value of this file is going to be a stateless function, not a class. This instance right here, instead of passing in props to its class definition, it's passing in props through the functional definition. And so, instead of accessing the posts with this.props, by passing in the props to our stateless functional component, we can access it through the first argument of our function, as props. So you can remove the this keyword since we're not accessing it directly from the component instance anymore. Everything should still work pretty well. Let's just go to our browser and make sure everything is fine. Localhost 3001. And everything still seems to work pretty well. If you are confused about what we just did, let's summarize it. We have our main component, which renders both a photo wall instance and a title instance. From the photo wall instance, we're passing in an array as props, which we're accessing through the first argument of our photo wall function. And like before, from the array provided to us by the props, we're mapping it over and returning three components of photos. And each photo component returns a figure, image, caption, and button. Combined together, all of that is displayed to our screen through React DOM. Now here's a challenge. Try and convert the title as well as the photo component as stateless functions. Pause the video and give it a try. So let's start with our title. Declare a function title with argument props. Remember, the component instance is going to pass in its props to the stateless function as arguments. And this render method, if we think of it as just a return statement, we can safely return this div inside of our stateless function. And finally, remove the this keyword. We're simply going to access our title through the argument. So same idea, we're creating a title component instance in the main component. And the title component instance is still defined to return a title based on the props that it provides through the argument. Obviously, it is then rendered to our screen along with our photo wall. Let's remove all of this. Same thing with our photos component. Make it into a function with arguments, props, and return value. Remove the this keyword and simply return whatever we had initially, right here, like so. If I remove this and export the functional component instead, everything should still work as it should. And let's open up the browser to make sure of that, and indeed, everything still looks pretty good. That is all for this video. The main idea is if all your component has is a render method, you can safely replace it with a function. That function takes in props as an argument and returns some UI. We also don't need to worry about the context in which the function is being invoked, as there is no this keyword anymore. If you open up Developer Tools, however, go to More Tools, Developer Tools, go to the console, we get these warnings of unused variables. It's simply referring to the component property that we're declaring but not actually using anymore. So you can go ahead and delete it for the photo component, for the photo wall, and for the title as well. We're not using the component anymore. If you want, you can feel free to revert these as classes. The class syntax, to me, I think is a lot cleaner. And the class actually gives you access to many more lifecycle methods that are very useful, as opposed to the function. We'll look into lifecycle methods later on, but so far the only lifecycle method we've been using for classes is render. And the rule of thumb is, if you're only using the render method in your class, if you want, you're allowed to convert your class to a stateless functional component, as we did in this video.